Hello. In the whole history of Warhammer, there are not many characters who can claim to have been there at the very beginning, both narratively and literally, but the ones that can tend to be undead. And one of them has an incredible legacy indeed. Heinrich Kemmler, the Lichemaster. Kemmler could be argued to be one of the earliest special characters in the game, having been released in the second edition of Warhammer. There was a dedicated miniature for him, and he was introduced with a special campaign set that would start his story, but far from end it. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're exploring the history of the terror of the Lichemaster. One or two brave souls said that they would go up to the valley head and see for themselves what was happening. But they did not dare, for at the valley head, at the very edge of the glacier, lay the long, dark grave mound, an ancient thing that inspired dread and foreboding. So, no one went up the valley, up to the glacier and the mound that hid in the great black shadow of the Frugalhorn Mountain. Now, Halloween may have just passed, and I have promised 1,000 other deep dives. Unfortunately, it turns out they are taking me a bit longer than I had hoped, and having just moved house, you can see the brand new Sorcery Tower. I have been behind on my production, so rather than not release anything or get overly stressed out about not making enough progress with some of those projects, which don't worry, are still coming, I thought instead I would take a little bit of time to just enjoy a few Warhammer supplements and releases that are great fun. And I thought I would start with something that is incredible fun, the terrifying Terror of the Lichemaster, a second edition campaign pack that is awesome. Terror of the Lichemaster was released in 1986 for the second edition of the game. In the box you'd find 3 linked scenarios that told the story of the evil Lichemaster Heinrich Kemmler and his number one guy, Lord Krell. In life, Krell was a warrior of chaos, but in death, he is resurrected by Kemmler as a warrior of bones, and still chaos too. Kemmler has been weakened by his necromantic exertions, and Krell exacts a deal for his service. Kemmler and his skellies will finish what Krell started, namely, killing lots of innocent folk in the name of chaos. Together, they violently descend into the Frugalhorn Valley with reckless abandon, in search of more fresh recruits for Kemmler's resurgent Revenant army. Terror was one of 3 campaign packs released during the second edition of Warhammer. These were important releases that helped to build out the world and the setting, even though it wasn't quite the Warhammer we would recognise today. They would each come with linked narrative scenarios. There were card tokens included that you could cut out to represent the forces. There were army lists that were very specific, and there was card terrain as well. And all of them were released alongside some special Citadel miniatures. Some of those were recoded, re-released miniatures, and some of them were brand new sculpts to represent the characters that were featured in the stories. These packs were not about competitive balanced play. They were very much rooted in the role-playing and historical wargaming origins of Warhammer Fantasy. It was about retelling stories, taking on those characters, and just having a lot of fun with it. And that is why they include so many uneven forces, unusual scenarios, and there's a lot of comedic flair in there as well. Though it's not especially scary, the Terror of the Lichemaster would lean into the nightmarish horror of the undead, something that is just, it's unnatural and has inbuilt horror elements. And as well as bringing life to the undead, it would bring life to 2 of the most iconic undead characters, whose legacy would stretch all the way to the end times of Warhammer nearly 40 years later, Heinrich Kemmler and Lord Krell. And then, during a night storm as black as hate and loud as agony, the power of an irresistible evil was released upon an isolated people. The Terror of the Lichemaster had begun. The box featured cover art by Gary Chalk, and there was a chalk cover on the scenario book as well. That book was written by Rick Priestley, with some fantastic interior art by Dave Andrews and Tony Ackland. And there were also sheets of card tokens to cut out, and a number of cardboard buildings to assemble as well. Those buildings were designed by Dave Andrews, and the sheets are chock full of extra signs, posters, and details that add loads of great fun. A particular favourite of mine is this wanted poster for Mad Bobby Naismith. Warhammer was still finding its feet during this era, and the supplementary material was growing and expanding at a prodigious rate. This set would actually proclaim that it was Arcane Architecture Village Pack 2, a sequel to the first Village Pack, Blood on the Streets. Blood on the Streets was an early entry into the GW tradition of cardboard terrain packs, with 12 Dave Andrews buildings that could be cut out and assembled. The pack also included a 24-page booklet by A.V. Skabankovitz that provided descriptions of 54 NPCs and introduced a geographical area of the old world known as the Riding, a place that would later be updated for the Woofrup 2nd edition as Old Riding. With their plentiful NPCs and world building, these sets would help to establish and enrich the emerging Warhammer world, the lore that we were seeing start to really take root. It would be firmly established by the 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy, but these sets and the Regiments of Renown and other books and releases that were coming out around this time were doing a lot of work to lay the foundations for what would become the recognisable Warhammer world. In Terror of the Lichemaster, we would get places like Quinay in Bretonnia, and the introduction of the Princes, which is a likely precursor to the Border Princes. But of course, the most lasting legacy from Terror of the Lichemaster would be those main characters, Heinrich Kemmler and Lord Krell, proper villains for the Warhammer world that would continue to haunt it again and again. The Lichemaster Heinrich Kemmler is introduced as an aging traveller, formerly a man of great power, but whose hard life has taken its toll. Having been hounded from town to town, he has only now finally found the treasure he has long searched for, the burial mound of the great Chaos champion, Lord Krell. After many nights of exhausting conjuration, Krell is returned to unlife by Kemmler. This bony horror still clutches his murderous black sword, an evil weapon that had sent 1,000 screaming souls to the Chaos Hells. Sensing Kemmler's weakness, a deal is struck by Krell. If Kemmler works in service of the Chaos Gods, he will prolong his life, and Krell will become his minion. With Krell have returned his loyal lieutenants as well, Ranlak the Black, more cruel in death than even in life, and the zombie thriller killer known as Mikhail Yakson. Like pretty much all of the Warhammer products being released around this time, especially those written by Rick Priestley, this set is absolutely stuffed with a cavalcade of references and in-jokes and bits of satire and bits of silly comedy. Goofy, obvious, subtle, it's all there, just packed to the gills with humour. Both the OLDHAMMER in Toronto and Awesome Lies blogs have done wonderful work to identify possible influences on the creation of the Lichemaster himself. Around the year 1486, German inquisitor and clergyman Heinrich Kramer released a text called the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, a treatise on the acts and identification of witches, the heresy of sorcery, and the torturous methods by which confessions of witchcraft could be secured. Another suggested influence is the infamous Dr. Faustus and his legend of making a deal with the devil, much as Kemmler has done with Krell and the Chaos Gods. Along with that brace of dodgy bastards, there is of course another, perhaps more obvious inspiration, and one that is truly evil, Heinrich Himmler, the Nazi. And I'm not really going to dwell on his evil any more than I have to. On a different and more musical note is the skeleton warrior Mikhail Yakson, almost certainly a reference to Michael Jackson, especially when you consider this quote: "By them hung the stench of decay, the rotting zombie legions, and their lieutenant Mikhail Yakson. In death, Yakson was a great dark skeleton, long and thin, and with a skull that burned with an unnatural light, and from in between his huge dead teeth there issued a foul, thin shriek that few could listen to without sickening." I guess Priestley thought that Jackson's music was bad. And if you want further evidence, then you could probably point to the fact that Mikhail Yakson's flaming skull seems to be inspired by the infamous Pepsi commercial that Michael Jackson was filming in 1984, which featured a pyrotechnic gone wrong that made Jackson's hair and scalp catch on fire. There is also the inclusion of elf archer Rialta Snow, who made an appearance in other early scenarios, a would-be Lothario called Antonio EPSTEIN that Rick Priestley has since confirmed was an in-joke about Citadel caster and good friend Anthony Epworth, and a family of Waltons-like characters who happen to live at the little house by the dairy. Lord Krell and his lieutenant Ranlak the Black were both modelled on pre-existing skeleton miniatures, sculpted by Alan and Michael Perry. Originally sold simply as C-17 skeletons in the pre-slaughter range, the whole bunch would later have slaughter tabs added, and Ranlak and Krell would get their names officially recognised. Special miniatures were also produced for other characters in the scenario, such as Kemmler himself and Mikhail Yakson, who were both sculpted by Ali Morrison. The battles themselves are relatively simple and feature uncomplicated objectives. Kemmler draws life and power from sacrificing innocent people, so the undead simply want to slay everybody, whilst the people of the valley draw life from being alive, so they just want to stay that way. It first begins with an assault on a dwarven mine at the Frugalhorn Valley Head by Ranlak the Black and his skeleton warriors. The dwarfs, though outnumbered, are led by the stout Grimbrin Finehelm, so named because his hat is really quite fine. Elsewhere in the valley, Mikhail Yakson leads his thriller zombies on a raid of the Bogles farm. John Boy, Laurabeth, Corabel and the dog Fritzy, as well as the rest of the family, are really in for quite a rough night. Then, in the final scenario, the combined undead forces of Kemmler descend on the Frugalhofen village. If the dwarfs or Bogle family survived their previous encounters, then the village has been awakened to the impending danger. Otherwise, they are caught unaware. Fortunately, as well as the people of the village, there are a number of passing adventurers, like the elf maiden Rialta Snow, the creep Antonio EPSTEIN, the Bretonnian anarchist Grimwald Calico, and the halfling runaway Gim Grundle. These heroes can also raid the magic shop for powerful treasures that might aid in their defense. All three scenarios feature character illustrations by the great Tony Ackland, and Dave Andrews provides yet more fantastic art in the form of the scenario maps. Alas, the maps are actually missing the deployment info, so aren't as helpful as they otherwise might be. Fortunately, a flyer was later printed that corrected the mistake, dubbed the Terror of the Lichemaster. Speaking of printings, both Blood on the Streets and Terror of the Lichemaster were reprinted a couple of years later with new cover art provided by Ian Miller, and it is absolutely stunning. Truly, this is amazing. Of course, Kemmler and Krell were far from finished terrorising the old world. In the Citadel Journal from spring 1986, which featured a tremendous cover by John Blanche, we would be treated to a sequel. Written by Rick Priestley and Jez Goodwin, Vengeance of the Lichemaster would serve to introduce the Skaven to the Warhammer world for the first time. I did a whole video about their origins, in case you're interested in finding out more about that scenario and the Skaven in general. I love those filthy rat boys. Priestley would also revisit Kemmler once again, this time collaborating with Carl Sargent for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The Lichemaster supplement would rework all of the existing scenarios from Warhammer Fantasy Battle into a mini-campaign for the role-playing game, featuring most of the main characters and most of the key events that took place during those battles. In 2005, White Dwarf and designer Matt Ward would bring us the return of the Lichemaster that would see Kemmler and Krell descend into Athel Loren in search of yet more sacrifices and devastation. As well as these appearances in White Dwarf, there would be updated miniatures for both characters, and guest spots in books like the Gotrek and Felix series. Curiously enough, there's apparently also a powerful necromancer featured in Jim Butcher's Dresden Files series, who is also called Heinrich Kemmler. I don't know if that's some multiversal shenanigans, or just a classic bit of homage. Kemmler's story, I think, is a fun one. He's such a despicable, monstrous character. He's a perfect villain, and Krell as well. And together, the fact that they turn up again and again, that there were so many beautiful miniatures of them, that there's so much amazing, beautiful art of them as well. They really are like Warhammer at its finest. They're just a great part of this world. They're rich and characterful. And they come back again and again, like Warhammer does. You can't keep them down. They always come back, and they always want to play and fight. It's great stuff. This, my friends, this is Warhammer. It's brilliant. It is on my hobby bucket list to play a faithful recreation of the Terror of the Lichemaster and its sequel, The Vengeance of the Lichemaster. I would absolutely love that. That is a huge ambition for me. One of many, but one that is very, very high on my priority list. I just think it's great. It's Warhammer. It's fun. I had to cut myself off because I just repeated myself about 20 times there talking about how cool it is. But yes, that is the Terror of the Lichemaster. I hope that you've enjoyed this little run through a really great scenario pack, a real proper piece of Warhammer history that's just terrific fun and hopefully appropriate to the season. If you would like to support the work that I do here on the channel, please feel free to check out my Patreon. I've put a link to it in the description below. You'll get exclusive and early access to stuff, regular updates, that kind of thing, and Discord access as well. If there is a Warhammer supplement, a campaign set, a book, a product that you would like to see explored in more detail here on the channel, leave a comment down below because I'm always looking for fun stuff to spend some time with. I really appreciate you coming and spending some time with me. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, this is the New Sorcery Tower, and this is Jordan Sorcery. Honestly, the number of moving boxes I had to dig through to find this. Oh, I think I might have too much Warhammer.